Hey, I'm Sylvie with the San Diego County Bicycle Coalition, and it's Bike Theft Month, so we'll be focusing today and all month on videos devoted to bike theft. So today's video is all about how easy it is to steal a bicycle and all the things that you might want to begin thinking about doing so that you don't lose a bike that you love. I've got Kevin joining me today.
Hi.
So I'm just going to kick things off. I've got this bike locked to a bike rack, and I'm going to begin by showing you how easy it is to steal a bike, especially if you didn't lock it well.
So these are not instructions. You know, if you're looking for ways to steal a bike, just know that it's impossible and you should never ever try it. That being said, if you do have a bike and you only lock the front wheel, then only locking the front wheel means it's pretty likely that there's a chance that you only have a front wheel when you get back. So the front wheel's got a nice heavy lock on it, and now we've got a bike that's completely removed and a bike rack that has a wheel locked to it. That's absolutely a situation I've walked past in places in San Diego, downtown especially. But it's especially easy to remove that front wheel. So it's important to remember that if the front wheel is the only thing you have locked, then the front wheel is the only thing that's going to be left when you get back.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'm going to toss this wheel back on. This time I'm going to lock my bike, hopefully in a way that's a little less easy to steal the whole thing. But I'm just going to do it again. I'm going to see what I can get off and how quickly.
And maybe Sylvie, you can share anecdotes as well. But I mean, I've watched videos of friends' bikes being stolen on security footage and things. And the amount of time that it takes to go from a bike that's fully locked to a bike that is being ridden away, even with a fairly okay lock and everything's locked the way it should be, can sometimes be less than 20 seconds, less than 30 seconds for sure. So one of the things that I like to remember and that we're going to be talking about today is that, you know, while there are good ways and bad ways to lock a bike, it's also important to remember that there's no such thing as a perfect lock. There's no such thing as an unstealable bicycle. Every single one, there's some way to defeat it. Some ways take longer than others. Some ways are easier and harder. And so our goal is to just make it harder for a bike to be stolen using the best tools we can.
So I just want to point out with this one, I see this a lot. I love this. So in essence, nothing on the bike is actually locked. My chain, my bike lock is going all the way around the frame, not inside of it. And so I could basically take off my wheel and slide this off of the bike and I'd have the whole bike. Just wanted to show you that one quickly, but now I'm going to actually lock a piece of the frame, kind of the most common thing people do when they just like hop inside a shop. And I'm going to begin taking things off. And in the meantime, Kevin's going to tell you a little bit about some of the most common places that bikes get stolen, and I'll pass it off to you.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, being someone who's involved in bicycling for as long as I have, I've definitely have known people who've had bikes stolen, and I get told stories about them a lot. And I feel like the one that I hear the most often always starts with the phrase, "I was only going to be gone for a second. I was just running into the store for 5 seconds." And so every single time normally that I use a bike lock, I do it the perfect way. But this one time is the one time that I didn't lock it up all the way because I knew I was just going to run inside, grab a bottle of water, and come right back out. And those 20 seconds, those 30 seconds that it takes to run inside and grab that bottle of water is more than enough time for someone to grab the bike and walk away. And absolutely do not rely on someone else walking by saying, "Hey, is that your bike? Prove it." You know, because that's not anybody else's responsibility to do that for you. And it's absolutely, you know, can be uncomfortable and dangerous to try and confront someone about that stuff. And I will say, inappropriate sometimes. I've seen on Nextdoor and apps like that where, you know, there's these posts about, "Oh, I saw someone riding a bike that looked too nice for them. Should we call the police about it?" And that seems like the wrong thing to do. So in order to prevent any of those situations from coming up in the first place, the answer is make the removable parts of your bike be locked down. Now, Sylvie mentioned places that bikes are stolen from. Obviously, putting your bike in as public a place as possible is a good thing. Putting your bike in a situation where it's not out of the field of view of other people is probably a good thing. The bike's only going to be as good as the lock that's on it. The security of the bike's only as good as the lock that's on it, and that even applies to sometimes enclosed areas. So if your bike is in a garage of some kind, then it's important to remember that if someone gets into that garage, then that, if the bike's not locked as well, then there's, still the opportunity for the bike to be stolen. So this bike that Sylvie's dismantling is locked. It's currently locked right now, and it's locked in a way that's fairly common. It's a heavy duty, thick lock. That lock is not able to be ground down with an angle grinder at all. That's one of the benefits of those chain type locks. The thing about the lock, though, is that they're only going to be beneficial if you use them in the correct way. So taking a lock that costs a whole bunch of money and putting it on a bike that costs a whole bunch of money is great. But if you're only locking down the parts of the bike that you want to keep, then you're only going to have those parts back. The amount of time that's gone on since we've started this video is less than 10 minutes. The amount of time that's gone on since she started dismantling the bike is less than 5. And we're essentially down to the frame right now. And those components that are removed from the bike are absolutely much easier to get rid of, to fence, than an entire bike. And so if you're someone who's looking for a quick buck, then, coming across a bike that is not in a well-lit place, coming across a bike that is not locked appropriately is an opportunity for someone to, if they're not going to completely strip the bike like Sylvia's, it's real easy to walk up, take a component or two off, and then walk away. So if you're going into the store for 5 seconds or you're going into work for 10 minutes, it's important to remember that, if your bike is the most desirable bike in the pack, then it's more likely to be stolen. So there's a couple ways that you can make it less desirable. One is making it harder to steal, putting a big, thick, heavy lock on it. But if you're going to do that, you have to lock down the parts of the bike that are removable. How much time do you think that took, Sylvie?
It felt like less than 5 minutes. I was a little sloppy, though.
Yeah, I would say absolutely less than 5 minutes. What's left on that bicycle right now?
Okay, well, I got a little lazy. I could have taken off the brakes, but I didn't. I was missing the tool to take off the crank, so I left that on. I could have taken off the kickstand, but I don't want a kickstand. That's not so useful to me.
Were the tools that you used to do all this specialized or expensive tools?
Most of the stuff I used, I have on my multi-tool. I decided to use specialty bike tools instead, just because I like the way they feel in my hand. But yeah, most of this was stuff like I would usually have on me anyway.
So to get the bike down to where it is now wouldn't require... you're fast at this because you've done it before. But if someone else wanted to do this, how much longer would it take them? I mean, it seems like not much, right?
Nah, not too much.
Yeah. Okay. So, as far as visuals go, that was a good one. Do we have any other eye-popping visuals?
Yeah, I've got a couple of locks. So one example I want to show you, people usually say, I believe it's the lock should cost about 10% of the cost of the bike. This is a classic cable lock. This kind of thing maybe costs like 10, 15 bucks. It takes less than a second to kind of cut this thing in half and take anything that used to be locked to it. I actually had a bunch of bikes stolen at my house. I had them in an enclosed patio. Someone came into the patio and they cut this lock. So maybe twice as wide as this little guy, but same kind of thing. This thing takes a second to cut if you have the tool you need, which I thought I would just do now so you can see how simple that is. I think this thing cost me about 25 bucks and it had a combination lock on it. Combination, I still have it. I'm using that someplace else now. But this is just a quick Look at how easy it is to cut one of these. Cool.
Yeah, that took no time at all. And that's the situation that I've seen before where even with a tool that's not as big as that one, if you've got a fairly thin cable style lock, a pair of pliers that's strong and, you know, some bulky forearms can get you through some of those thinner rope locks with fairly little effort.
So one of the things I want to show people is some of the stuff you can do to keep all the things that you value the most on the bike. So if you don't know about pinhead locks yet, you should. This is a pinhead lock. That's a pinhead lock. They come in a couple of sets. You can buy just the wheel locks. They make through axle locks. They make pinhead locks that it's just an axle nut that you can't get off the typical tool. They also make locks that you can put on the seat post and locks that you can put on the headset. So this is the one that goes on the headset, which was the thing I think took off second. I got the wheel off and then I went and took the whole cockpit off the bike. So the way that this would usually be assembled, just like that, and you can use the pinhead system instead to lock the stem on. What's so cool about this is that you get one key that goes with the set you have, and nothing else matches this. So I had a bike stolen about 2 months ago, and it had pinhead locks on it, and the wheel got a flat. They didn't know how to get the pinhead locks off, so they couldn't fix the wheel, and they ended up getting my bike back because of that. So big shout out to Pinhead. I owe you one.
So the bike that you stripped earlier, you did using a little bit of specialized tools, but essentially just basic tools that anybody has access to. So if someone wanted, even if after they had already stolen your bike, God forbid, to bring it down to its basic components, especially with all the time in the world, it wouldn't take them much time. But with these pinhead locks, it sounds like, I mean, nothing's impossible, but it's going to be a lot harder, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they actually ended up bending one of the pinhead locks, but they still couldn't get it off. So what happened was the bike was found by somebody else. They identified it based on the unique serial number on the bottom of it, and they looked me up on Bike Index. And because I love my bike, I listed it on Bike Index, and so it was obvious it belonged to me, and someone was able to find that it was my bike, contact me almost immediately, and get it back. Just show you again, this is actually the pinhead lock that would go on the back wheel, but same kind of thing. You can see one side is totally smooth, so no way of getting that off. And then the flip side has its little indentation that only matches my special key.
So it's kind of like those screws that are on like electronics where you have to have a certain kind of screwdriver to get it off. It's the same thing, except for there's literally only one screwdriver that gets it off.
Yeah, I was leaving my house today and I have a bunch of pinhead locks because all of my bikes now have pinheads on them. And it took me a couple minutes to find out which key fit with my lock that I was leaving with.
Well, that sounds like a good problem to have. You mentioned Bike Index. Can you talk a little more about what that is?
Yeah, I'd love to. And we have an episode, I think the next episode is all about Bike Index as well. So you'll get a whole bunch of info on that. But Bike Index basically is a totally free online tool to help people keep a log of which bikes they own. It allows them to update and say that bike has been stolen. You can also go on and say, I got my bike back. But the best thing about it is that because you have access to the page, you can make changes anytime something else happens with that bike. So the big challenge is that, someone's bike is stolen, they go to the police, they say, hey, my Schwinn was stolen, and the police say, okay, how do we know that it belongs to you if I find it again? And most people don't have any way of identifying that a bike belonged to them. So you can go on Bike Index and you can list the kind of bike you have, all of the components you have on it. So if you've put a special saddle on, if you've got some funky wheel lights on the back wheel, if you've got some special pedals that you love, you've got a kickstand that's kind of unique, you can list all that stuff out so that it's obvious that this is the bike that belongs to you. As a little caveat, sometimes when people steal bikes, they'll take things off and they'll switch them out so it's not as obvious. So one of my stolen bikes, when I got it back, it had totally new pedals on it, but it still had the same wheels because of those pinhead locks. Yeah, the coolest thing about Bike Index is that you can go and say a bike was stolen, and they will push that out to social media instantly. And so any place that people follow about stolen bikes, they'll get a little ping that you had a bike that was stolen. It's also something that in some cities the police use, pawn shops use, and bike shops use. And so if a stolen bike comes into one of those spaces, maybe not a police station, but into a pawn shop and into a bike shop, anybody in that space can go online, look at Bike Index, type in the details of that bike, and find out who it belongs to. The biggest issue that we kind of have in the United States is that not enough people use it. And so a lot of bikes get stolen, and we have no way of finding out who they belong to and getting them back to those people. But
on the next episode, because I was going to say, it reminds me a little bit. I remember specifically as a kid going to the fire station and having them give me a special little bike license that was stuck onto the bicycle. But from what I understand, that's definitely not something that is done anymore. And also the idea that every bike was required to have a license just ended up creating more problems than it solved. So this sounds like something that's sort of the best of both worlds in that, the bike is identifiable, but there's not like a law saying that you have to have it. It's something that you can opt into that is helpful.
Yeah, and I think the immediacy of it is so cool because the way it goes now, you file a police report, that takes a couple of days to actually show up. And a lot of people, when they steal bikes, immediately want to sell it and make some money off of it. And so if it takes a couple days to actually get that bike on file, and someone's taken it to a couple of pawn shops and a couple of bike shops and then given up and maybe even gone out of state with it, you have so little chance of finding it again. But if you've got it listed on Bike Index, you can instantly say my bike was stolen, and then anybody can look it up. So I have one last thing I wanted to show you all, and that's how to keep the saddle and the seat post on. Because a lot of times that's a place you put a bunch of money into a bike. So this saddle had a quick release that was holding it on. Pinhead makes something like this, but instead of the quick release, you got a clamp. And this is not the exact piece, but same kind of thing. You've got a little bolt that goes in, and that's what locks the seat post in place. And then something I see a lot, especially like in big cities on the East Coast, is that people will take a length of bike chain and they'll use that to lock the saddle itself onto the bike. So that might look something like this. You've got some old bike chain you don't need. Maybe you even go into a bike shop and ask them to give you some bike chain. You kind of take it down, loop it onto the frame. And if you don't have a chain tool at home, this won't be something you can do at home. But with that said, a lot of people don't take a chain tool out with them. I do, but I'm a little unusual. Most people don't. So this is not the kind of thing that someone would be able to take off too easily. And it's all about time. If someone can take away a bike in a couple seconds, like that is appealing. If it's gonna take you a couple minutes to steal a bike, especially if it's daytime, most people will just do the easiest thing they can. So if that means just taking off a wheel, taking a piece of the frame, that might be how you get left with some of those funky incomplete bikes, but not totally dismantled bikes like this one. Okay, so that's it. So now if I wanted to steal this, it's not going anyplace.
Very cool. It reminds me, I've heard the joke before about how when you're running away from a bear, you don't have to be the fastest person, you just have to not be the slowest person. And it sort of applies with bikes and bike theft as well. Whereas if your bike is the prettiest and easiest bike to steal, then that's the one they're going to go for. So if you make your bike less desirable, either through locks or an ugly bicycle, then it sounds like that's something that can help. The other thing I wanted to notice, or I wanted to draw people's attention to, is you've got it locked to that blue pole there. I've seen pretty frequently people lock bikes to, the trees that are out front of businesses, or even the little pieces of wood that hold up the tree that's out front of businesses. You've all seen those. I mean, if your bike's desirable and people have the inclination, literally kicking that over, knocking it down, cutting it down, or in this case, yes, absolutely, literally lifting the lock over the top of what it is that you have it locked to. So remembering that it's, a lock is great, using a lock is best, and using a lock in the appropriate way is the thing that's going to make the most sense. I think those are our